Welcome to Future of Caregiving.
Being able to change the course of somebody's brain's future is really what excites me every day to go in.
Today we are joined by Mitch Clionsky. He is a Board Certified Neuropsychologist who specializes in evaluating and treating patients with cognitive impairment, dementia, ADHD, and traumatic brain injury. He's part of a husband and wife team, and they have a combined 70 years of professional and clinical experience in medicine and neuropsychology, and they have treated over 20,000 patients. They partner at a private practice, the Clionsky Neurosystems Incorporated, and that's based out of Springfield, Massachusetts. And they are experienced public speakers, podcast guests, workshop presenters for general and professional audiences. There's more information on their website at www.braindoc.com. Hi, I'm your host, Neely Ambron, and this is Future of Caregiving, where we explore the rapidly evolving world of caregiving. From technological advancements to demographic shifts, we'll delve into the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead for those who provide care, as well as those who receive it. Join us as we discuss the future of caregiving with experts, care providers, and those with firsthand experience. We'll examine the trends, breakthroughs, and innovative solutions that are shaping the way we care for each other now and in the years to come. I would love to be able to give you an opportunity to give us your story as we get started.
Wow, a story. So, my professional story, my personal story, I'll start with the professional. As you said, I'm a neuropsychologist. People say, wow, that sounds impressive. What does it mean? I say, well, basically, we measure how people think. So we do this in several ways, both by interview, but a lot of it through administering tests of attention paying, tests of learning and short-term memory, tests of problem solving, tests of intelligence, tests of communication, and we touch on a lot of emotional issues as well. And then we compare those test scores with how we would expect someone of their age and background to be able to do on such tests. And if everything is normal, then we give them reassurance and maybe some recommendations going forward. But many of the people I see are referred in by neurologists and primary care docs. So there's already a suspicion that they're having some problems. And we basically quantify where those problems are and how big the problems are, tell them what we think it means in terms of a diagnosis, a label that we could put on this that'll help us to then figure out next steps in treatment. Most people don't recognize and they get scared about the question of dementia because they think there's nothing that can be done. And therefore, the more that you avoid thinking about it, the better off you are. Truth is, there's a lot of things we can do both to slow down or stop people from getting worse, and in many cases actually improve their thinking abilities. And it's not by eating a cup of strawberries a day, I'll tell you that. It's a lot more difficult than just what you're consuming. Being able to change the course of somebody's brain's future is really what excites me every day to go in. And I've been doing this for 45 years. So as we say, it's not our first rodeo. And we have learned a lot of very important things in the process, part of which we put into a book recently. And we'll talk about that if you like, but if not, that's okay. We could talk about caregiving exclusively today because I see about 1,000 family caregivers every year. And that's a really important issue.
Absolutely. I mean, you said by the time they bring your patient in to see you, they've already recognized a couple of issues. So it's likely that the caregiver is there with them when they come in to see you, yes?
Almost always. We want an outside informant. See, one of the problems with memory disorders is that there's a certain subgroup of people who have very little awareness that anything's wrong. As far as they're concerned, they're only there because the family member wants them to be there or their doctor told them to come in. They don't see, it's like having a blind spot in your rearview mirror. And so for them, when you point out, well, you just told me that your mom's giving you advice, You're 75. You already told me your mother died about 15 years ago. How do those two things stack up? And they tell you, I don't know, but they just do. Everything's fine. I'm not having any problems thinking. And so you're dealing with somebody there who's not a good reporter of what's happening with them and what their abilities are. On the other hand, you sometimes have people who are quite aware of what's going on, sometimes to the point where they're so frightened about it, so depressed about it, that you have to deal with their depression and their anxiety. But they at least have awareness, and you can form a partnership with them. Say, here's how we're going to work on this, and here's how we're going to try to make things go better.
That's beautiful. Forming the partnership. That's. I really like that. I am personally affected by dementia. My father-in-law actually has it, and it has kind of grown into Alzheimer's at this point, which I'm sure you're familiar with that type of case. And also, like my late grandfather, he also had dementia in his later days. So I can understand how upsetting it can be. What are some of the common struggles faced by the caregiver of individuals with dementia? And do you have any, like you talked about, you kind of partner with them. What are can you give us some examples of like some of the solutions that you come up, or the encouraging words that you can offer the caregiver or the caregivers here that are listening to this podcast?
Well, great question. And it's a really complex question because there's a lot of different varieties of people who get dementia, a lot of different varieties of the caregiver relationship with that person, what their abilities are at that point in their life. If you're the child of someone who has dementia, it's one thing if you're also in a sandwich generation, you have your own kids to take care of, maybe your own job to do, and you have to figure out how to take care of mom or dad. It depends on how many other people are there to carry the load. Is that person still married? Do you have siblings, brothers and sisters who can pitch in? Or do they see things differently, and therefore you're at odds with them about whether or not mom or dad even has a cognitive problem? They're living in California, you're living in Massachusetts. You say, I'm really worried about mom. And they say, I talked to her on the phone a month ago. She seemed fine. And you realize that you're seeing her every day. They're talking to her on the phone once a month. And probably the only questions they're asking are, how are you? And how things are going? Is everything okay? And gee, it's great talking with you. Let me tell you about the kids. So their view of what's going on may be very different than what's really going on. There's also the question of whether you see eye to eye with that sibling. Now, I'm also a child of a person who had dementia. My mom had what is called vascular dementia. And it happened when I was about 50 years old. And she then proceeded to live for about another 12 years after that. What I discovered in that was it's easier being on my professional side of the caregiving equation than it is being on the personal side, because it changes your relationship. No matter how the relationship was, it changes it. Oftentimes there is a role reversal. The person you used to look to tell you what to do, how to do it, the person you wanted to emulate, now is failing in those abilities. You're now having to step in, make decisions for them in some cases, convince them in some ways that you're no longer in diapers, so you're now a grown person and you're smart and you can actually help them out, and you want to pay them back for being a good parent by caring for them. So that's a very important kind of role reversal that you have to negotiate. It's a little different if it's a paid caregiver or a volunteer caregiver. They don't have to overcome that. You do. Now you have to put aside who your mom or dad was and deal with who they are, and also try to get them or engage them in revisiting who you are as an adult. Because for all what it's worth, and I've been in both positions. My youngest child is now 33. You still see them as being kids. Doesn't matter how old they are, whether they're a partner in a law firm or something. They're still 8 years old, and looking to you to tell them how to get to school. So it's very hard to change those perceptions. It's even worse when the person's having some memory problems. So we're dealing with a lot of real complexities that are individual. And when I see somebody who comes in with a family member, we always want the family member to be there, both to give us a history, but also when we meet with them to talk about the results. Because we know that the person with cognitive impairment is going to have trouble figuring out how to act on the recommendations we're making, how to make the changes in their life that might be necessary. But having that person there, I'm also assessing, what are your supports? Who's helping you? Because burnout in the caregiving world is a very real phenomenon. And a lot of times caregivers take on everything because they feel either a sense of duty or just a desire to be there and be everything for their parent. And that's a wonderful kind of emotion. But there's a real burnout factor that is part of that. And if you as the caregiver burn out, you're of no help to that person whatsoever. It's a lesson I learned in junior life-saving course when I was a kid. I tell this story because it's so personal, but it's true. I was in this life-saving course and had to learn how to go in and pull somebody very heavy out of the bottom of the pool. And I actually failed as a junior lifesaver. I failed the test, but I learned a valuable lesson, which was you could never save somebody by drowning yourself. And that's what I tell caregivers. You can't save your parent if you're so burned out that you've got no energy. If they're up half the night because they've reversed night and day, there's no way that you can do 3 shifts a day. That's just not physically possible. So you have to figure out, where are my resources? Either personal or financial. What kind of help can I bring in? Can my loved one live with me? Can I live with them? Or do I need for them to be in something like assisted living? It's very different depending on your family dynamics, very different depending on how you feel about who should care for somebody. So it's a very individualized kind of thing, but you have to really engage them in that discussion if you're going to do the right kind of job for your patient.
Absolutely. Wow. That was awesome. I just love how you guys actually, you talk to the caregiver about what resources they have. Do you have support? That is so important. And there is support out there, but you don't always know where to look, where to find it. And when you get news, like I suppose if you're the caregiver of somebody who just got diagnosed with dementia, that shock factor is there. And now you're almost starting to go, I imagine that you might even start going through kind of like the grieving steps, because that's a major change. That's a big change, and any big change like that it's going to have its own set of an adjustment period. And so it's kind of hard to think about what resources may be out there when you've just been faced with that news. I'm sure you guys probably have, you probably offer the caregiver like maybe a pamphlet of resources that they can tap into to get that respite care that might be so crucial to their health.
To be honest, I used to do that, and I found that it required such constant updating, whether it was the support groups and who was leading them through like the Alzheimer's Association, or local day activities programs and who offered them and who had transportation. And it got to the point where it was actually too much for what I had to offer, because I have a certain amount of time and a lot of patients, and we wanted to focus on what we did best. It's a real gap. There isn't in our area much of a community resource for coordination. If you're wealthy, you can hire a care coordination nurse, and they're wonderful. And they make sure the person gets to their appointments and gets their prescriptions, and they help navigate the whole field. The problem is a lot of people where I live and who the people I see don't have the resources financially to be able to do that. But the other places were going through a period where they were, 1 month they'd be there, the next month somebody else was offering the service, or the service disappeared. And so I got to the point where I said, here, there's some online things. You're going to have to do your own research. Here's some government agencies that are local social service agencies. Contact them. I just can't do it for you.
That's an excellent point. That just, gets at the point of how important case management is, quality case management. And there aren't enough case managers. But that is such a vital job to help people, find the resources they need, to help people get to their appointments on time. So thank you so much for bringing up that point. What you had mentioned earlier that you said your father had gotten dementia. Your mother had gotten dementia. Excuse me. Yeah. So, were you were already working in the neuropsychology field probably when that happened? Did your research in the field make it any easier to get that to receive that diagnosis, or do you think that you experienced similar emotions to what you tell so many other caregivers when you provide that diagnosis?
Well, it gave me certainly a lot more insight because I had been working in that field for over 20 years. So I knew a lot more about it. And I also was able to get my mom to the neurologist who I respected and to know about the medications that we have had out in the world since the late 1990s. They're still out there. There's 4 of them that have been approved since that time and are effective at slowing down the progression of the disease. So I understood that, and I understood what tests should be done. I understood a lot about it. It doesn't necessarily protect you. All that intellectual knowledge doesn't protect you from the fact that it's your mom. And so you're dealing with this I was dealing with this on several levels at once. I knew how to run all the right things and make sure she got here and there and call in favors. So that gave me an advantage. But the disadvantage was that I couldn't fix her. As much as I wanted to, I couldn't turn things around. And I think that for most people, they may have that desire if they're caregivers. I want to fix mom. I want to make her happy, or dad. But they also realize I'm not an expert in this. I'm supposed to be able to do something more. There's a responsibility that I think I felt much more strongly than the average person did because I had all this background and still fell victim to the same limits, the same frustrations, the same grieving. And believe me, you do grieve for that person long before they've passed. It's a slow kind of grief. And it's different than when my dad died suddenly. One day at the age of 56, he was there, and the next day he was dead. Very different kind of thing from watching someone fade away. And both are horrible ways of losing somebody, but just different. And so there's a whole issue, as you mentioned, for grief counseling and grief dealing with it, because it's the same process of letting go.
Absolutely. I'm watching my husband go through that right now. As I mentioned, my father-in-law he had dementia, and now it's gone to an Alzheimer's. But
let's stop for a second. I want to clarify something.
Sure.
Alzheimer's is a type of dementia. It's not a worst case of dementia. Oh. Dementia is an overriding category, like automobile. Underneath automobile, there's Fords and there's Chevys and there's Toyotas. Underneath dementia, there's Alzheimer's disease, there's vascular disease, the vascular dementia, there's Parkinson's dementias, there's Lewy body dementias, there's frontotemporal dementias. So I'm not trying to be critical, I'm just saying I want your viewers to understand that this is an overriding all-cause problem. It's only that Alzheimer's disease has gotten the most publicity. And they've done the best job of labeling and marketing themselves. And it's viewed as something worse than dementia. It is not. Every dementia is horrible in its own way.
That is excellent. Thank you for clarifying that. you just taught me something. I didn't know that before. I thought they were two completely separate type of things. So thank you for clarifying that for me and for our listeners and viewers. That's excellent insight. So I'm watching my husband go through kind of the grieving process with his dad, who has dementia. He's, it's just, I'm watching him every now and he just looks so disappointed. Sometimes he's like, that's not my dad anymore. He's kind of fighting it so hard, trying to get him to do things he used to do. And his dad has no interest and he's like somebody totally different. And it's hard to watch my husband face that disappointment, but I imagine it's even harder for him to be seeing that.
Loss of interest, that kind of apathy is oftentimes one of the very first things you see. When you think about it, in order to be interested in something, you have to really understand it and be able to understand the nuances of it. If you used to be interested in fly fishing and you can no longer figure out how to do the motion, it doesn't have much interest. If you used to enjoy golf and you now can't figure out how to coordinate a swing or keep track of the score, it loses its interest. So a lot of times people say, maybe they're just depressed because they've lost interest. Sometimes they are, but sometimes the apathy is the reflection of that difficulty in really understanding and enjoying the process of doing something. And it does feel like it's someone else. I thought that, I could write a book called, the title would be, What Alien Abducted My Mother and Took Her Soul? Because it was not the same person. And that's part of this whole process of dealing with it. You have to grieve who the person was and then begin to connect with the person who remains, because they're different. For some people, I've seen them, they stop calling that person mom or dad. They start calling them by their first name because it gives them a little bit of emotional distance and they can now view it. It's also good to have a sense of humor about it. When my mother was in assisted living, she had a dog that she had in assisted living. It was her dog at home. And she would have the most fantastical kinds of fantasies and really delusions about what had happened. So my brother, who I'm really close to, we're the only two kids, she was in assisted living. And one day he went to visit her and he said, "How you doing?" And she looked at him and said, "Sparky, dog. We ate Sparky last night."
Oh my goodness.
And my brother said, "Okay. How was he?" She said, "Delicious." And it's a joke that we still tell, not because we view her as any less, but because she would have laughed at the joke.
Yeah. Oh, it's good that, sometimes you have to laugh to keep from crying,
You sure do. You sure do. And it's okay. It really is. Having permission to laugh at is almost as good as laughing with that person. You can't just get into always being serious about this, or else it'll rob your soul. There are moments of humor, and there's also moments of clarity. One of the things we see all the time is someone says, "Oh my God, I went to visit mom yesterday," or "She woke up from a nap, and it was like the mom of 20 years ago." And I thought, I must be wrong. She must be fine. And then 10 minutes later, she was who she has been. And it's almost like there's wires inside. There really aren't, but it's almost like they suddenly make a connection and that person is back very briefly and then they're gone again. And so it's the strangest thing how you could be variable depending on the time of the day, depending on the stress, even depending on how well that person has slept as to how they're thinking.
Oh my goodness. Wow. That's almost a tease, Boy.
Yes. It is
right now I'm thinking of the movie The Notebook right now, where like he reads to her when she's got dementia. He reads a book to her. She comes back to him for 10 minutes and then she's gone again. Yeah. So anybody who's familiar with that story knows what I'm talking about. But yeah, what a tease. And but at least you get them back for just a little while if that does happen. I love what you said about grieving the person they were and embracing the person that they've become. That is such a beautiful way to think about it.
Thank you. Yeah, it's helped me because it helps to sort of demarcate those two parts of that person. And the other thing that's also really important is, especially in the early stages, there's a real tendency to treat the person like a Coke machine. You say, what do you mean? I said, if you put in money in a Coke machine and you don't get a Coke, you might put in a little more money, you press the button, you don't get a Coke, then you start kicking the machine, you start shaking the machine. So when people start to lose abilities, there's this tendency to say, come on, Dad, you can do this. You really know how to do this. You can dress yourself. You can do this. What's wrong with you? You can really get angry because you're so frustrated at who that person has lost, what they have lost in the process. And I tell people that's also really, really, really normal and expected. It's only afterwards that you realize that that's just you being frustrated. That's just you hoping to do something to jog them back into remembering, to jog them back into being able to do something. And forgive yourself. It's okay. It's okay. You'll learn from it. You won't do that the next time. You'll do it differently.
Yeah, it's important to be gracious with yourself. Absolutely. Especially when you're just doing this for the first time.
Other people have done it before, which is why support groups are really helpful, why books can be helpful. There's a book that Johns Hopkins Press publishes called The 36-Hour Day. And in fact, I have a copy on my desk here, but it was originally, it's now in its 8th edition. I have the 7th edition here, but it is like the caregiver's guide. It is very well written, very commonsensical kind of information, practical kinds of things. So I strongly recommend it. This is one thing that you can look up things and say, oh, that's how they handle it. One of the examples they give it in this kind of work is the idea of temporizing. Temporizing is when you tell someone not now, but later, and later might never come. Years ago, I was doing a talk at a senior center. And after the talk, a woman came up and said, I wanted to tell you about what I figured out with my husband who has dementia. I said, okay. She said, so he's not supposed to drive the car, but he still wants to. So when we come down here to the senior center, he always says to me, I want to drive. I don't tell him no. That's the important thing. I tell him, look, we're in an equal partnership. I'll drive down. You can drive home. So she drives down. He's fine with that. They do whatever they're doing at the senior center. It's time to leave. He says, I'd like to drive. And she says, but honey, we're an equal partnership. You drove down. I'll drive home. Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
I just love
nice.
that whole story. Yeah.
That is really great. It's funny, I was going to say, we just kind of call that procrastination, but I see what you did there, that, kind of postponing. It's not no, it's just a way
Later.
to kind of get them to be agreeable without letting them down. That's excellent perspective. If there's one thing that I think that you're giving us today, but from what you're saying to that book recommendation, it's all this wonderful perspective that you're offering. If there's one thing caregivers need, it's perspective, and that you're just offering us so much great perspective today. You have a book yourself, Dementia Prevention, Using Your Head. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Love to. I was hoping you'd ask. It was originally, it's also a Johns Hopkins book. It was originally intended to be released at the same time as the newest update on the 36-hour day. Unfortunately, there was a pandemic. I don't know if you've heard about that, but there was a pandemic that took place. And so all of publishing got pushed back about a year. The ones that were like updates were easier to publish, so they came out. So it didn't happen that way. But I view our book as sort of essential reading for people who have been with somebody who has dementia and say, I don't want to do that. I want to go down a different road. I'm worried about that. I haven't met a caregiver yet who isn't worried about their risk of dementia. And the truth is, the facts are, from large-scale studies, we now know that half of all dementias are preventable. Between 40 to 60% of all dementias can be avoided. So the whole purpose of our book is to educate people about that, to present a model for the factors that cause dementia that are reversible or avoidable, to give them a questionnaire that they can fill out to figure out where their strengths and weaknesses are, and then to talk about how to make change. Because changing is one of the most difficult things for people to do as they get into adulthood. And yet, changing is one of the most important. Adapting is critical as we get older. We can't just keep doing it the same way and expect things to work out the same. We need to adapt just as much as we did when we learned to ride a bike or learned to drive a car or figured out how to go away to college or the military or whatever we went on to. So that's the whole purpose. This is a personal guide to using real science. There's no fads. There's no eat this, don't eat that kind of stuff in there. There's no magic pills made from jellyfish. There's nothing in there that, believe me, there's a lot of those things. You'll see them all the time because they're clickbait. These 4 things are things you can eat there isn't a thing that you can eat that would prevent dementia, or I would be eating it. There just isn't.
Right now, we'd be eating it right now as we're talking.
Probably.
That's what we'd be doing.
I was so excited when they said, "Oh, there's factors in chocolate that will do this." I said,
"Please let it be
wonderful.
popcorn. Please let it be popcorn."
Man, that sounds great. Then they said red wine. I said, fantastic. This is even better. Something was published a couple of weeks ago that suggested strawberries. I can dip the strawberries in the chocolate. I'm really sailing now. No, it doesn't work. But this other stuff does. And we believe that if we can get people to pay attention early enough in their lives, we're talking even in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. In fact, the follow-up book that my wife wants us to write, she's an MD, she's the co-author, lead author actually of the book, Mitch Clionsky, is How to Dementia-Proof Your Baby. Turns out there's stuff that begins in the womb. Has to do with prenatal care, has to do with making sure that you avoid injury to the child at a young age, has to do with remaining in school, getting a better education. There's a lot of protective factors that begin in childhood that will then show up 60, 70 years later. And we need to start.
I'm going to need that study.
Wow. Really are
as a mother, yeah.
And there's things that you can do starting in your 20s and 30s, even more things in your 40s and 50s. A lot of them are midlife factors. But I get people coming to me for the first time who are in their 70s and 80s, a couple people in their mid-90s. Even those people can do things today that'll help to protect their brains against decline now. So it's never too late. It's also not too early. Fantastic.
Everything we talked about today, amazing stuff. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Clionsky. We are out of time today, but I just want to thank you so much for joining us today. If you are interested in more information on affordable healthcare, visit us at caregiving.org. And thanks again, Dr. Clionsky. We really appreciate your coming on today.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap for this episode of The Future of Caregiving, brought to you by Caregiving. We hope you've enjoyed this exploration into the world of caregiving and that you've learned something new and valuable. If you want to stay up to date on all things caregiving, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. And don't forget to check out caregiving.org, where we're dedicated to improving the future of caregiving through technology and compassion. From all of us here at Caregiving, thank you for tuning in.